Hey guys, it's King Egbert here. Okay, so today I'm gonna talk about pretty serious topic. I know, I know this is politically explosive, and I know it's gonna probably offend some people, but you know, I think as Thomas Paine said, if you're afraid to offend, you can never be honest. So first of all, before we get started, I just want to make it very clear that we here at J. Edgar Vacuum Cleaner and the Angry Birds family, we condemn all discrimination, all racial discrimination, all discrimination based on sex, national origin, religion, etc. So nobody should be accusing us falsely of racism or anything like that. What we're here to talk about is that, so unfortunately, due to the dangerous rise of anti-intellectualism around the world and also the failure of schools to properly educate people, we're seeing a new a topic being discussed that really should be discredited entirely in an educated society. And that topic is slavery and colonialism reparations. Um, and I've wanted to make this video discussing this topic for a while. But it's a lengthy subject for me to get into. But I've decided, seeing the rise of, apparently a huge portion of the U.S. population is defending the inexcusable actions of people like Carmelo Anthony. So it seems that this country's polarized enough that this very stupid subject of slavery, colonialism, reparations needs to be addressed once and for all. So that it disappears from public discourse, because it's really stupid, and I'm gonna show you why it's such a stupid argument. All right, take over for me, Chuck. Okay, so the primary reason why slavery reparations, specifically reparations for the transatlantic slave trade, is such a stupid the discussion is because at the exact same time that the transatlantic slave trade was happening, tens of millions of Europeans were being enslaved, mostly into sexual slavery, all over Afro-Eurasia. In events you can read all the massive Wikipedia articles about, like the Ottoman slave trade, Barbary piracy and the Barbary slave trade, Crimean Nogai slave raids into Eastern Europe and the Black Sea slave trade, Kazakh slave raids on Russia and the Central Asian slave trades, Albanian piracy, etc. And also, at the exact same time the transatlantic slave trade was happening, tens of millions of sub-Saharan Africans were being enslaved and castrated by non-Europeans all over Afro-Eurasia, in events you can also read all the massive Wikipedia articles about, like the Trans-Saharan slave trade, the Red Sea slave trade, the Indian Ocean slave trade, etc., etc. Yeah, it's worth addressing. So to put this into perspective, whereas black slaves in the United States were being forced to pick cotton, black slaves in Anatolia were having their genitalia torn out while being forced to guard the sex dungeons inside of which European slaves were being raped by the Ottoman Sultan and by Ottoman bureaucrats. So, use your intuition here, which seems to be the greater injustice. And let's address now the subject of colonialism reparations, because, so more specifically, we've seen Algeria's president, Abdulmajid Tebboune, who's going to the United Nations and demanding that France give reparations to Algeria for colonialism, which is very, very odious, because the primary reason France invaded Algeria in the first place was to put an end to Barbary piracy and the Barbary slave trade. So anyone who knows the actual history of Algeria should be laughing Tebboun's demands out of existence, because it's so stupid. If because no offense to anybody who's Algerian here, but like, if Algeria didn't want to be brutalized by France, maybe they shouldn't have spent centuries kidnapping millions of Europeans and thousands of Americans and forcing them into sexual slavery, and refused to stop doing that despite going to war with the United States of fucking America over it, and despite multiple Anglo-Dutch naval bombardments and multiple French naval bombardments. Because, Morocco, Tunisia, and Tripolitania, also known as Libya, did the same shit as Algeria, but at least they knew how to fucking stop when they went to war with the United States over it, and also got more threats from Europe. Algeria literally didn't stop. War with the US in 1815 didn't make them stop. Two Anglo-Dutch naval bombardments in 1816, 1824 didn't make them stop. French naval bombardments in 1827 up to 1830 didn't make them stop. It was the French ground invasion of Algeria in 1830 that finally put an end to all these pirate attacks and slave raids against European and American shipping and European coastal settlements. Yeah, so, sorry, no offense to our Algerian audiences. We love you guys, but, if we're gonna give you some tough love here, France does not owe Algeria reparations for something Algeria brought entirely upon itself through its own disgusting behavior. Like, yeah, we get it. The French conquest of Algeria was brutal. We get it. A million Algerians died. A million French people died. France was conquering Algeria at about the same pace that Putin is conquering Ukraine at. Yeah, it's no surprise that, the conquest was so brutal, but given Algeria's very, very sordid history and what they did to Europeans and Americans, I would say, dude, sorry, we can't really have much sympathy for you. So, you're in no position at all to be demanding reparations. All right, and another thing about it, we had, one more Gaddafi. Let's talk about Gaddafi for a second. So, Gaddafi, he had a lot of great domestic policies when it came to Libya, but his foreign policies were just absolutely terrible. And for the most part, and the worst thing he ever did as Libya's leader was probably when he successfully extorted, I believe, $5 billion in colonialism reparations from Italy. Because unfortunately, Italy's leaders were stupid pussies and agreed to give the reparations to him. And that's just so abominable for me because, pirate attacks from Libya by Barbary pirates, as well as, even Albanian pirates, depopulated Italy for centuries. And, in terms of proportionality, Italy still hasn't completely recovered from that. And, Italy conquering Libya, helped put an end to the trans-Saharan slave trade too, just as a plus. So, yeah, shame on Italy's leaders for being stupid enough to actually pay those reparations instead of giving Gaddafi the middle finger. And, French actions in Algeria were not the only retaliatory actions taken for all these slave trades against Europeans. We had Russia conquered the Crimean Khanate and the Nogai Horde. There were two Nogai Hordes, the Lesser Nogai Horde and the Greater Nogai Horde. And Russia also conquered Circassia, all to put an end to Crimean Nogai slave raids into Eastern Europe and the Black Sea slave trade. We had Russia conquering the Kazakh Khanate and the Kyrgyz Khanate and the Khanates of Khiva and Bukhara, to put an end to Kazakh slave raids on Russia and the Central Asian slave trades. We had Habsburg Austria and Russia working together to fight like hell to kick the Ottomans out of the Balkans, to put an end to the Ottoman slave trade and Albanian piracy. And as for the trans-Saharan slave trade, and that was ended by European colonization of North Africa. France conquering Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, Italy conquering Libya, Britain conquering Egypt, etc. The Red Sea slave trade also ended by events like Britain conquering Yemen and Britain conquering Sudan. And, Britain and Italy conquering Ethiopia and Eritrea. It's Somalia. And, the Indian Ocean slave trade was ended by actions like Belgium conquering the Congo, and Germany conquering Tanganyika, and Britain conquering Zanzibar, and India and the Dutch conquering Indonesia. So yeah, European colonialism is the reason these horrible, horrible slave trades aren't happening. And in addition, these retaliatory actions that Europeans took against, their former slavers included Russia, the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union deporting up to 4 million Crimean Tatars to Anatolia, up to 120,000 Nogais to Anatolia, over 1 million Circassians to Anatolia, almost 1 million Chechens to Anatolia and North Mesopotamia. We had Stalin's starving to death 1 million Kazakhs, many of whom had been slave raiders against Russia in the late 19th century, or were children of slavers. And we also had, following Austria and Russia successfully getting the Ottomans kicked out of the Balkans, millions of Ottoman loyalists also deported to Anatolia. And it's thought that about 1/3 of the population of Turkey today has ancestry from the Ottoman loyalists expelled from the Balkans and Crimea and the Caucasus in retaliation for all these slave trades. Yeah, and another thing that's worth mentioning too is the hypocrisy of people saying that, oh, America should take down Confederate statues because they were slave owners. But it's like, wait a minute, but Turkey gets to have statues of Ottoman sultans everywhere. And not just Turkey, like Bosnia and Albania and Kosovo, they all have like statues of Ottoman sultans, and Ottoman sultans, as we know, helped get tens of millions of Europeans and tens of millions of sub-Saharan Africans enslaved, and yet nobody's calling for Turkey to tear those statues down. And Turkey is so not sorry for their sordid history that they even proudly name Turkish vessels of the Turkish Navy today after Barbary pirates like Turgut Reis. And we have Algeria naming highways after Barbary pirate sponsors like Hussein Dey. And then we have people saying that, oh, Belgium should take down statues of King Leopold. Well, first of all, there's a lot of AI slopaganda against King Leopold. You'll see a lot of AI slop channels saying that, oh, King Leopold killed 15 million Congolese. No, that's total BS. If you actually bother to look up the numbers range from anywhere from as low as 1.5 million to as high as 13 million, which, that's still huge, but what about the guy that was running the Congo immediately before Leopold? Tipu Tip. Tipu Tip was an Afro-Omani slave trader who helped supply millions of Central and Eastern Africans to slave markets in the Middle East and India and Indonesia. And yet there's plenty of monuments to him all over Africa today. Why is nobody calling for them to be torn down? And to conquer the Congo, Belgium had successfully defeated Tipu Tip. Yeah, and also, talking about these slave trades more broadly, like the history of these slave trades. So, like, we address it one by one. We had, Barbary. So Barbary piracy and the Barbary slave trade actually date back to the Umayyad and Rashidun conquest of North Africa, but they increased in intensity starting in the late 15th century when Kemal Reis became the first major Turkish pirate to be based in North Africa. And yeah, these Barbary pirate attacks. So Barbary pirates went as far as freaking Iceland and the Faroe Islands and Britain and Ireland, though their primary targets were France, Spain, Portugal, and Italy. And yeah, these attacks continued until 1830 when France conquered Algeria. And like, The Ottoman slave trade. I mean, slavery had been a central institution of the Ottoman Empire's existence, like the entire Ottoman Empire's existence. Like, like I cannot stress this enough. I'm not exaggerating when I say that the Ottoman Empire is like basically what would happen if you gave Jeffrey Epstein his own country spanning 3 continents. And yeah, and the Ottomans proper were just slave raiding the shit out of places like Germany and Austria and Czechia, and yeah, nearby places in Eastern Europe too, Romania, and they had the practice of, kidnapping kids in the Balkans too, with something called Devshirm, for the Janissary Corps. These boys kidnapped, they were sodomized, they were molested, they were raped, women kidnapped were forcibly impregnated, and eventually, these boys were groomed to become Janissaries. It's disgusting. Yeah, and the Crimean Nogai slave raids into Eastern Europe and the Black Sea slave trade. So that shit started, in the early 15th century, and it also continued until, Russia conquered Crimean Khanate in 1774 and suppressed the Nogai horde that same year. And yeah, these Crimean Nogai slave raiders, they depopulated places like Poland, Ukraine, Belarus, southern Russia. And then we had Kazakh slave raiders. Kazakh slave raids on Russia started in 1690 under the reign of Toke Khan, and they continued until the late 19th century. And these Kazakh slave raiders and Kyrgyz slave raiders, they not only targeted, ethnic Russian settlements in Siberia, they even targeted Volga Germans. And, the slaves that they captured were sold all over Central Asia and even to the Middle East and India. Yeah, so basically, I mean, this evidence should really speak for itself. I mean, hopefully that's all you need to know that slavery reparations and colonialism reparations is just like such a stupid argument. It's like, by this logic, you could argue that countries like Turkey and Algeria and Kazakhstan owe Europeans reparations for slavery then, or countries like, I don't know, Turkey and Oman and Algeria owe sub-Saharan Africans reparations for slavery. Because the things that the Ottoman Empire alone, the things that the Ottoman Empire did to the horrible things they did to white slaves and black slaves was far more nightmarish than anything the Confederacy ever did. And no offense to our Turkish friends here, we're not trying to offend people, but unfortunately Turkey does have incredibly dark history, and it's important to recognize that, because even as recently as the 1990s, we had Serbians committing war crimes against Bosniaks and Kosovar Albanians in retaliation for historic injustices against Serbs, like the Ottoman slave trade. And even more recent historic injustices like, the Ustasha fascists, who were Croats and Bosniaks mass murdering Serbs. Yeah, so I think we're doing children in school a massive disservice not teaching them all about these slave trades. And all this information, I'm saying is 100% easily verifiable. All you need is basic access to Wikipedia, and you'll see that I'm 100% right. And it's pathetic that because Algeria, for example, demanding reparations from France, it's dudes, France literally left Algeria more developed than when they found it. And Algeria's been independent for 64 years. If your country is a hot mess right now, that's not the fault of France, dude, especially because you've been getting so much aid from Russia and China. It's what have you been doing with that aid then? And also, Algeria has, the strongest military in Africa, I think. They have Russian Sukhoi Su-57. So it's dude, what are you complaining about? Yeah, and I think that with regards to Turkey having statues of Ottoman sultans, or like even Africa having monuments to Tipu Tip and whatnot, I think that can be justified, like, under the argument, oh, well, it's heritage, not hate. And it's like, okay, fine, but then by that logic, then America should be allowed to have Confederate statues kept up, or Belgium or the Congo allowed to have statues of King Leopold kept up, because, it's heritage, not hate. Yeah, and this colonialism reparations grift runs deeper. Like, we literally had fucking like Zohran Mamdani. We're big fans of Zohran Mamdani, but we have to condemn him for this because this was a big L. He was demanding King Charles return the Corridor diamond to India, and it's like, bro, how about India solve its widow burning and open defecation problem first? Like, before you make demands like that. And now we have Mauritius trying to harass the US and the UK to give up the BIOT. Because decolonization, blah, 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 blah. Bro, like, shut the fuck up. Like I am so tired of hearing this shit. And unfortunately, there's a huge portion here in America, too, of, like, the black community that, unfortunately... supports the actions of Carmelo Anthony because they haven't been taught about any slave trade other than the transatlantic slave trade. But as it's very clear now, the slave trades that were happening simultaneously in Afro-Eurasia were far more brutal and far more scary than anything happening in the Americas. So if anything, the transatlantic slave trade was, as crazy it is to believe it, was actually the most benign slave trade that was happening. Because, hey, at least it wasn't sexual slavery. At least it didn't involve castration. And, part of the legacy of the Ottoman slave trade of Europeans and sub-Saharan Africans is the first black pilot was Turkish. He was descended from one of the few sub-Saharan African slaves that managed to not be castrated by the Ottomans. And again, European slaves being taken to Ottoman sex dungeons to be raped inside of. It's horrible. It's horrible, and like, if you are aware of the existence of the Ottoman Empire alone, like, you recognize, like, why it's just such a crazy, stupid argument to make about... like, oh, there needs to be reparations for slavery, reparations for colonialism. It's like, dude, like, even if we gave, slavery reparations here in America, like, that would destroy the economy. Like, even if we ignored the rest of this, all the history going on, that explains why slavery, colonialism, reparations is so stupid. It's like, dude, what do you think is going to happen, like, if we just suddenly give, like, 13% of the U.S. population millions of dollars each? Like, you're going to have shortages everywhere. You're going to have disrupted supply chains long term. Like, you're going to have massive hoarding epidemics. It's like, dude, like, it's not even economically, like, ignoring, like, how immoral it is. It makes no sense. The best way to solve injustices against the black community caused by systemic racism is to invest in black communities, to expand the social safety net to benefit all Americans, black or white. All right. And, another interesting thing I'd like to mention is, fun fact, East Asia had its own version of the Barbary pirates. They were called Japanese pirates, but they weren't all ethnically Japanese. Many were Chinese, many were Korean, many were Mongolian, but they were all based in places like the Ryukyu Islands and islands in the southeast, South and East China Seas, and the Sea of Japan. And, they were active from the 13th to the 17th century. And they basically did the same things to East Asia, the same things to China, Korea, and Japan that the Barbary pirates did to Europe. They attacked Chinese, Japanese, and Korean shipping and Chinese, Japanese, and Korean coastal settlements for the purpose of kidnapping the people and enslaving them. And just like how Barbary piracy and the Barbary slave trade didn't end, until the French conquest of Algeria. Um, Japanese piracy didn't end until, and also Chinese piracy didn't end until China, Japan, Korea decided to conquer the islands from which the pirates were based in, and put an end to these slave trades that were happening as a result of these pirates. These pirates also attacked Southeast Asia too, and Europeans took a lot of counter initiatives against Barbary pirates and Crimean Nogai horsemen. Cossack counter raids against the Crimean Khanate and Anatolia. The Knights Hospitalier launched their own counter piracy initiative called the Maltese Corso. There were plenty of wars between France and Algeria even in the 17th century, like almost 200 years before the French conquest. So there was a lot of back and forth. Or France sending its own corsairs to hunt down the Barbary pirates. So crazy shit, bro, crazy shit. And the thing is, it's kind of sad that there are no video games or movies all about this stuff, because say what you will, Barbary pirates and Albanian pirates and Crimean Nogai and Kazakh horsemen, the Ottoman Army, Navy, Japanese pirates, and Chinese pirates, like, these are all far more interesting than Caribbean pirates ever will be, if you ask me. So, you can make a whole subculture out of this. So I feel like these countries, trying to bury this history or refusing to acknowledge it is kind of a missed opportunity, if you ask me. But I guess not everybody is as creative as I am. But anyways, guys, that's it. So, send this video to all the racially divisive grifters that keep pushing this idiotic narrative of, oh, we need to have slavery and colonialism reparations, because it's just so stupid. It's the stupidest political argument I've ever heard in my lifetime. Like, the only way we can solve this is to, fix the education system, encourage people to do more research, and combat the spread of anti-intellectualism, and just keep rubbing this history, all this historical knowledge, in the faces of people who push racially divisive nonsense until they crawl back into their mommy's basement, where they belong. So, yeah. Thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to leave a like, comment, subscribe, check out all of our content. Click that notifications button so you never miss another video. And help us win the YouTube arms race against Mr. Beast by making us the first channel in world history to get over 1 billion subscribers. This has been J. Edgar Vacuum Cleaner and the Angry Birds family. Peace!